Hello and welcome
Blog
to.
Talk Radio.
You're listening to Metaphysical Media with Stephen and Steve, and tonight we are talking about the Ukraine and Russia and their relationship. I am Stephen. Hello and welcome, and I have with me my colleague Steve.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's good to be here, Stephen.
Oh, it's great to be here as well. For those at home who would like to follow along, you can find a lot of the charts that we're going to be talking about tonight in the Study Charts album at the Metaphysical Media Group Facebook page. And this is a very complex situation we have going on here. In our private talks about this, I often call this a story of return and displacement because there are so many different groups that are vying for the territory in the Ukraine. There are the Crimean Tatars, sort of the ethnic ancestral claimants to this land. There's the Ukrainian people themselves. Then there are the Russians who are sort of new on this scene. And so it's complicated. We're going to do this over a couple of episodes here. But first, why don't we just start talking about the natal entities, the natal charts of these countries, so we can understand their sort of personalities, as it were. How does that sound, Steve?
Sounds great. Good way to start.
Good way to start. And so we'll actually weigh in first with Russia. We all want to know about Russia. What were some of your first observations when looking at the Russian chart, Steve? What kind of person, if Russia were a person sitting in front of you, what sort of person would Russia be?
Well, let me say, before I answer that question, Stephen, I want to say that when I looked first at the Russian chart, and then I looked at the Ukrainian chart, and my immediate reaction was, the Ukraine didn't use an astrologer. Because it's a far more unfortunate chart than the Russian chart, and they were created around the same time. But certainly Ukraine's chart is more unfortunate. So if I were having a child, for example, and I had to choose the chart, I wouldn't be choosing the Ukrainian chart. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, and I'm looking at these charts. I'm sure you are as well, Steve, with no type of bias towards my own country or Russia or the Ukraine. We're trying to be neutral here. And looking at the Ukraine's chart, right off the bat, I see that it was cast sort of in a subservient relationship with Russia. There's a dependency on Russia. If you look in Russia's natal figure, which is in the Study Charts album, then you'll see, look at all of those planets in the fifth house. The fifth house deals with your children. These are all the children. Look at all the children that Russia has. Mother Russia, all of her children. And one of the more troublesome ones there is that retrograde Mercury in Sagittarius. And we'll talk about him in a little bit. But first, I want to draw your attention to Saturn in this chart. It's not in the fifth house. It's not a child of Russia. It's in the sixth house of servants. And this Saturn is the symbol for the Ukraine, this Saturn in Aquarius. Once we get to looking at the Ukrainian charts, this will be obvious that Saturn is a very, very adequate symbol for the Ukraine. Now, Saturn does other things in the Russian chart. Being the ruler of the seventh house, he would represent the Russian females because in mundane matters, the seventh house is given to the females of that country, the first house to the males. So here we have the Russian female in the sixth house capacity, which is servile to the nation that is Russia. And the Ukraine shares this relationship with Russia. The end result, the goal of this Saturn in both cases is a marriage with Russia, as shown by the seventh house, which is Aquarius. So yeah, I'd agree with you. It's definitely an unfortunate chart. Definitely.
Yeah. The other thing one of the things that struck me about the Russian chart was exactly that packed fifth house, as you mentioned. So. Yeah. The fifth house contains about 35% of the energy in the Russian chart, and it's extremely harmonious. And coming from the UK, anytime you go to London, you're staggered by the amount of investment and ownership in real estate, for example, by very wealthy Russians, these Russian billionaires, and that's explained by that powerful fifth as well, because it's the house of speculation. But I think that one of the things that struck me, Stephen, about the Russian chart is the confidence. You've got a good, powerful, harmonious sun and moon in the Russian chart. So it's quite a confident nation. And then the primary ruler of that fifth house is Mars in a fire sign, in the early degrees of a fire sign, Sagittarius. And that made me, my conclusion for that was, well, Russia is a nation that's got balls, they're prepared to take action. Mars in a fire sign, they're not afraid of taking action, and that's something that I was reflecting upon.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Mars is going to dominate the affairs of the fifth house, so Mars is going to dominate the affairs of all of Mother Russia's children. And Mars in Sagittarius is a lot more powerful than Ukraine's Mars. The Ukraine's Mars, as shown in the Ukraine's chart, is in the eighth house in Virgo. It lacks the dignity that Mars in Sagittarius has. Now, both of these, I would say, actually might have the same sort of dignity. Mars is actually a triplicity ruler of the Earth sign, but being placed in the eighth house, he's a little bit more troublesome for the Ukraine. He's going to cause more anxiety. So fighting age males in the Ukraine are severely frowned upon from the Ukrainian perspective, which is quite interesting. Now, some of the comments you said about the sun in Sagittarius, I like to look at these things, the luminaries, the sun and the moon. They're dripping with spiritual and karmic significance. The people of Russia are shown by that moon in Capricorn. And even though this is the new Russia, the post-communist Russia, those people, as symbolized by moon in Capricorn, are still very much with the gulag worker mentality. Capricorn, in this sense, is cold and forbidding like a prison. And the moon, the people, are there. The sun is what Russia wants to become. Now, I want to point this out very well. The sun at 16 degrees of Sagittarius is practically conjunct the rising degree, the ascendant of America in Sagittarius, at 12 degrees of Sagittarius. So this is what the Russians want to go to. And hence we have images of President Putin, without his shirt on, attacking Kodiak bears with dental floss. And, I like to call him Rambowski. We have President Putin as Rambowski. So this is an image, this is at heart an American ideal. This is Sagittarius. The sun in Sagittarius wants to expand. It wants to be stubbornly philosophical. It wants to be athletic. And so this is where the Russian people want to go. And this is going to be their justification for expanding into the Ukraine. And who knows where else they want to expand to. That'll be a speculation we engage in heavily during this series of shows. But at the core of it is that sun in Sagittarius. And ironically, it's very much the same type of American Sagittarius that we did. And so that when they start doing these things and manifesting that sun, they're going to say, but we learned it, America, by watching you.
Well, it's also that confident, expansive sun in Sagittarius that rules the ascendant in the chart I'm using.
Right.
Because I've got the ascendant here in Leo at 14 degrees. So this is a relatively confident nation, and the sun in mundane generally describes the leader or the characteristics of the nation's leaders. Mm-hmm. So they are confident, they are outgoing, they do have ambitions, and they're prepared to take action. One other thing that I noted, though, Stephen, is that the sun in the fifth house forms a square to Jupiter in the house of finances. So the Russian chart has a powerful and extremely harmonious house of finances. I would love to have that house of finances in my personal chart. But it's squared by the sun, indicating that the perhaps exaggerated ambitions of a leader or of leadership can cause economic damage, which is certainly the case at the moment because the currency is losing value and sanctions are in place, etc.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You mentioned earlier that the fifth house has to do with speculation and that Russian financiers are making a killing elsewhere in the world. Well, the fifth house is dominated by Mars because Mars is in it and very close to the cusp, but it's ruled by sign by Jupiter, who's in the house of Russia's finances. So a lot of these funds are going to be funneled right back into the coffers of Mother Russia. Now that Jupiter in the second house, which is it's going to expand the finances and the economy. It's going to be a boon and a good thing. It's being supported by an investment as shown by the fifth house. And look at all the areas that Russia is investing in. It's investing in Mars and Sagittarius, Mercury, the Sun. It's investing in Uranus. It's investing in the North Node, which seems to be a direction it should go in by definition, nature of the North Node being what it is. So these also, in addition to representing sort of satellite countries and children of Russia, they also represent financial investments of Russia. Now they also, to my mind, this phrase "children of Russia" could refer to satellite bloc countries, and it could also refer to party members. Even though there's no communism anymore, there will still inevitably be an oligarchy that were formerly referred to as party members. The Sun, the leader, Vladimir Putin, the president, is one such party member. The Sun in Sagittarius. Note, the people, the actual citizens of Russia, are the Moon in Capricorn. They're conjunct the sixth house cusp of servants. They're not children of Russia. They're servants, just like the Ukraine. The people are, the citizens of Russia are. You would not want to live in a society that is like Capricorn. It's cold. There are no rights. Even contrary to what might be said, you might have rights, but they're extremely limited rights. The people are servants of Russia. The children of Russia will get to rule. They're the party members, and they're connected to the second house by that Jupiter. Now that Jupiter in Virgo, to me, I don't like it. I mean, it's going to expand the finances, but let's look first what it does. It's going to create the eighth house for Russia. So in a way, Russia is creating the finances of its partners because the eighth house is the second house from the seventh. Do you see what I mean? So the eighth house, in addition to meaning death of things, is going to represent the finances of the partner. So Russia is going to spend its own money in order to prop up the economies of its partner countries and its investors. That's where Russia's finances are going. Jupiter is at fall or is debilitated in Virgo. Virgo is opposite from Pisces, which it rules. So this is going to be a misguided Jupiter, a Jupiter that is falsely optimistic, you see. It's not going to be a very good Jupiter. So it's going to make the sums involved quite large, but the benefit's going to be experienced by the economies of the other countries and the personal coffers of the investors. So the financial situation in Russia is pretty iffy right now, and that's going to play into the overall picture here in terms of what's happening to the Ukraine, I'm sure. Do you see? Are you still with me, Steve?
As is fiery anyway, but it's particularly fiery in Russia's chart because it's under a fire sign, Sagittarius, and it rules the midheaven. So it explains again the attitude of leadership or the administration and the influence that the nation would like to have in world affairs. And I think that when you take that moon, Stephen, the moon in Capricorn, so the people and the emotions of the people or the emotional heart of the nation in that cold sign of Capricorn, they're not an overly expressive nation, but that concerns me because if you think of working with your clients, it's the people that don't necessarily acknowledge, express, work with their feelings that have emotional blockages. And I think that's typical of Russia or the Russian people in this chart, but it's conjunct, that moon is conjunct Uranus, which suggests that they can fly off the handle, that pent-up resentments or feelings can be triggered by that Uranus into actions associated with revolt. And we've got the north node of the moon there as well. So yeah. I think that Russia is a nation that we really have to keep our eye on. I remember you and I talking a little while ago about Iran, and we must do a show on Iran at some point. But you and I both said and felt that the one to watch, particularly towards the end of this decade and into the 2020s, is Russia.
Absolutely agreed. A lot of what we're talking about here tonight, Steve, isn't really going to become a big explosive issue until we get closer to 2020, 2022, and thereabouts. A lot of the seeds of that future tumult, that future disruption, and I expect it'll probably be rather violent. The seeds are being sown today. Now, the moon is not only conjunct Uranus, it's also conjunct Neptune.
Yes.
And Uranus is also conjunct Neptune. So this immediately springs to mind sort of the messianic utopian vision that communism had, where the people's sacrifice and labor were going to usher in this golden age of Soviet productivity and bliss, and the people really believed that. I think the leaders of communist Russia probably knew the score, and the people eventually figured it out. But I think what we're dealing with here is a population that can be manipulated through delusion, through some being led like a carrot on a stick, but due to some vision, some utopian vision. I really do believe that, based on this conjunction with Neptune, and also again the retrograde Mercury as a bland and generic symbol of Russia's perception. It's retrograde. Mercury's in the sign of his debility, being in opposition from Gemini, which he rules. So this Mercury is rather coarse, and it's going to be traitorous. It's not a good Mercury at all, and it's going to represent a flawed perspective, in my opinion.
I agree, and I think one of the other things that's really interesting about that Mercury is that, as you said, it's overshadowed by the sun. It's conjunct the sun and it's retrograde, and any planet that's retrograde is disadvantaged to a degree, but it's that Mercury that rules the third house of Russia's neighbors, so it suggests some disadvantaged neighbors like the Ukraine. And when you look at the aspects in the charts between the different planets, you see that Mercury is squared by the Jupiter, explaining the fact that Russia has a stranglehold, a financial stranglehold over some of its neighbors, and that's certainly been the case in the Ukraine. But Stephen, I wanted to ask you what your feelings are about something that I was fascinated by. Okay. So when you take the Ukrainian chart and the Russian chart, and if you overlay the Russian chart on top of the Ukrainian chart, and you look at the 12th house of secret enemies in the Ukrainian chart, Russia's Uranus is right there in that 12th house. Russia actually has 4 progressed planets in there at the moment, but let's start with Uranus. So Russia's Uranus, which we said is conjunct its north node, so they've got this sort of potential to revolt, potential to be quirky or eccentric, irrational, and it's right on top of Ukraine's Neptune in the 12th house. And lo and behold, at this point in time, transiting Pluto, no less, the great transformer, that problematic, painful transformation, is right on top of that spot. So if you look at that in the charts, tell us what you think, because I'm fascinated by that whole dynamic. I think it just explains so much about what is actually occurring on the ground in the Ukraine at the moment.
Well, you know the way I see that, Steve? If we look at the Ukrainian birth chart, we notice Pluto in Scorpio in the 9th house, the 9th house of foreigners. To my thinking, Pluto is a symbol of powerful foreign help. And by foreign, I mean anything that's not Russian. Mm-hmm. I mean the UK, the EU, the United States, these types of foreign interventionists. And so by that conjunction in the 12th house, the United States has a long history of supporting insurgencies that it feels are beneficial to it. And and the 12th house by nature is a secretive house. But what's really interesting to me is if we look again at that Ukrainian birth figure, which is the second chart in the Study Charts album on the Metaphysical Media Group page. Look at Saturn, which is widely conjunct the ascendant. Okay, it's the national identity of the Ukrainian people. That's why I said Saturn was such a powerful symbol of the Ukraine in Russia's chart. Okay, it's well disciplined, it's organized, but it's incredibly servile. Look how it's retrograde. It's straining to go back into the house of confinement, the 12th house. So independence from Russia it doesn't sit well with the Ukrainian government. I'm not talking about, I want to be very clear, I'm making a difference between the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people. There's a huge difference between those two entities. The Ukrainian people, I'm quite convinced, are not at all happy with what's going on here. But the Ukrainian government, the people who are in charge of administering the Ukraine, they're very pro-Russian, and they're probably going to continue to be. They're what I mean by Saturn that is straining to go back into confinement. It's very much like an animal that's in a cage, and you leave all its life, and you leave the cage door open. And the animal's too scared to go out because it's so used to being in that cage all its life, it doesn't understand life in the outside free world. But if we look at the progressed aspects of the Ukraine, which shows how the people have progressed and evolved to this very day, then we'll see that moon is in Sagittarius. So the Ukrainian people are themselves hoping for that sort of American independence and freedom where you can live your lifestyle like you want. You can be gay if you want to. You can be a Scientologist if you want to. You can worship plums if you want. You can do whatever you want to do in America, and the people want that. That's where they've progressed to. But the administrative dictators, the ones in power in Ukraine, the Congress or Parliament or whatever body governs it, they're still with Russia.
Well, they were, but the president's been booted out and is now in Russia. So he's actually now in exile, hiding out in Russia. But to your point about the US, again, when you just take the Ukraine chart and you progress it to see what's going on at the moment, they do have their Jupiter now conjunct the Sun in the 7th house. So they are going to get help from abroad. They're already getting that help from abroad. But I think that you're right, that the relationship with the US and Europe, Central and Western Europe, is going to be what saves the day. But I would say, looking at the progression, Stephen, that this year is no doubt going to be a challenging year in the Ukraine. And then I felt, looking at the picture, that it probably settles down. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a walk in the park after this year, but I feel as though things settle down a little. But then I felt that it really kicks off. There's some trouble in July, middle of July. There's some complication or problem middle of July next year, 2015. But what really struck me was that it kicks off big time in 2018 and then becomes ridiculously chaotic in the early 2020s. Did you see that as well? I know we used some different tools. Did you see that when you were analyzing the Foderia for the Ukraine?
Actually, I certainly did notice that. I mean, in a lot of work I do with the Foderia, I'm shocked to notice how often Mercury becomes a sort of a lethal or troublesome and very difficult type of planet. And right now, the Ukraine is in the Mercury period of the Foderia. Mercury is going to rule this period, has been since 2009, and is going to rule it right up until August of 2022, at which point it will enter into another planetary period, the planetary period of the Moon. The Moon are the people of Ukraine. The Moon natally is in the 1st house, the house of identity. So from this period, 2022 forward, the Moon rules for 9 years. From this period forward, the people of the Ukraine are going to assert their right to an identity as a nation. Because let me tell you something, the Ukraine has a long and glorious history separate from Russia. Kiev existed before, Russia took over everything. Ukraine was a vital front in the advance of the Khans and out of Mongolia. If it weren't for Ukraine, who knows how far Islam would have advanced into Europe. So the course of history depended a lot on the Ukraine. Now that I've got that lecture over with, So when we get into the Firdar of the moon, she's going to want to create what she is determined toward in the birth chart, which is identity, the first house, the Ukrainian skill, the Ukrainian talent, the Ukrainian wit, and the Ukrainian body and life and vitality. So this would, to my thinking, signify a time of stubbornness from the people. I'm not going to go out on the limb and predict a formal civil war, but I would definitely say that the Ukrainian people are going to be a force to be reckoned with. And it's going probably, the first thing that's going to be examined is their relationship to Russia, which this will start around the 7th of December in 2023 when they enter into the Saturn sub-period. And we've already talked at length about how Saturn is such a powerful symbol for the Ukraine. And what this Saturn does is it represents servitude to Russia, obedience to Russia in order to produce a marriage to Russia. It's rather like a woman who is bending over backwards to impress a man, her fiancé, and to convince him to marry her and enter into a formal relationship. This will be re-examined starting December 7th, 2023, and it'll come under fire. Jupiter, the great liberator, that period starts March the 20th, 2025. Jupiter is angular and strong in the 7th house, very, very fully capable of bringing about what he promises. But he doesn't have so much dignity. So the liberation will occur, but it's going to be difficult. That same urge and surge and effort toward liberation is going to happen again earlier, though, 21st of March 2015, when they enter into the Jupiter sub-period of Mercury. But we'll just have to see how that plays out. It's going to be very, very interesting, to say the least.
Well, one of the things that concerns me is that, well, we know that everything's connected, so we know that what's occurring now is somehow wrapped up in whatever transpires in the future.
Right.
And when I see all this tension in the Ukrainian chart in 2018 and 2019, that really seems to indicate bigger problems on the horizon. And so you see problems in the 2020s as I do, but really, I mean, this chart's progressions in 2020, 2021 are really troublesome, and this lines up with our research work about that period in time, and it seems from our findings so far that the Ukraine is involved in whatever's going on in the world in the early 2020s, and every which way we look, it seems that we are finding indicators that that's going to be a very problematic time.
It will,
not just in the Ukraine, but pretty much everywhere.
It's going to have repercussions for a lot of nations, including our own, the United States of America. Now, interesting that date, 2018-ish, Ukraine will enter into the period of the sun. This is still the main period of Mercury, mind you, but the sun rules a sub-period from the 7th of December 2018 until the 14th of October 2020. And the sun in Ukraine's chart, if the moon shows where the people came from, which is communist, collectivist, Aquarius, then the sun shows where they're going to. In Russia's chart, they're going to Rambovsky. Remember Vladimir Putin as Danielson, practicing this crazy Siberian martial arts and running around without a shirt on and stuff. Okay, that's where Russia's sun is going to. In the Ukraine sun, it's going to Virgo, and that's a lot less glamorous. It's work, it's labor, it's servitude. So that backs up, again, that theme of servitude, which I discussed when I talked about Saturn and the 6th house and all of that stuff. This is another symbol of servitude, the sun in the 0 degree of Virgo. Okay, and so this is going to start in earnest in the early part of December in 2018. The Ukrainian people are going to feel it, and they're not going to like it. Next comes the Venus period, which the Venus sub-period, of the larger 9-year or 13-year Mercury period. That Venus sub-period starts October 14th, 2020, and it's going to be even worse because Venus is in Leo here. She's retrograde, and she's in the 7th house, which means she's very, very loud. She's conjunct Jupiter, so she's going to be made even more grandiose, even more dangerously grandiose by that conjunction. So the Firdaria supports the idea that from 14 October 2020 until late August 2022, the Ukrainian people are going to suffer even more, I guess, oppression. You know, how that Venus in Leo retrograde takes form, it's going to have the face of Saturn because we're in the bounds of Saturn here in Leo at the 28th degree. So it's going to be very solemn and sober. It's going to be of the nature of Leo. It's going to be fixed, and it's going to be fiery. So it's going to be unpleasant. And then the period of the moon begins in late August of 2022. And to me, I swear, just my intuition tells me this is a period of defiance, of rebellion. Mm-hmm. You know, the moon is the body. You know, so the Ukrainian bodies are going to be laid on the line here. They're going to be. This is a straw that broke the period of the moon. Of the sun and Venus, 2018 to 2020. I'm interpreting as a straw that broke the camel's back, sort of situation.
Yeah, well, looking at that period, there's looking at the progressions, and for our listeners, I want to explain that in astrology, major progressions or major progressed aspects describe deep underlying conditions. So some astrologers will say to you that transiting planets mirror what is occurring or trigger, not trigger, but describe what's occurring, and that's not generally true. It is important to observe the slow-moving planets like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, even Saturn and Jupiter, particularly when they're in the angular houses of a chart, of your chart or a nation's chart, because they are significant then. But you really have to look at these deep underlying circumstances described by the progressions. And when it comes to the Ukraine, that period, early 2020s, there isn't a nice progression on the list. And if these were my progressions, Stephen, I'd be disappearing to a cabin in the mountains for a couple of years with a nice stockpile of food and my cats, and I'd go and write a few books and lie low. Unfortunately, a nation can't do that.
No.
And I know that we said that we would have a couple of shows about the US because there are very interesting energies on the horizon for the United States. We'll go into that in more detail. But it'll be very interesting to see how all of that correlates with what we're seeing here for the Ukraine. Yeah,
right now, what's happening in the Ukraine, I get the feeling that it's very much a sense of, Big Daddy's come home. You know what I'm saying? Russia has gone in there to discipline a wayward bride, and there's a lot of karma being generated here. The outer planets, that's why they're so important in transit. The transits of the outer planets, they're not going to pretend some huge event most of the time. Their action is a lot more subtle than that, you see. And looking at the transits that are happening now, what we see is that Saturn, the transiting Saturn, the position of Saturn at this very moment, is going to be exactly conjunct the position of natal Pluto on Friday the 13th in June. Now, that doesn't mean that Freddy Krueger or Chucky is going to come out of the woodwork and start spraying people with uranium yellow cake. What it does mean is that there's probably going to be an event between that foreign, powerful Pluto and Saturn, perhaps some secret agreement or the hatching of some plan. I would expect it to be very, very subdued because that's the nature of Pluto here. Pluto is operating incognito. And transiting Pluto, which is different, now we're talking about where Pluto is actually at in the world, is conjunct that troublesome 12th house configuration of Neptune and Uranus. And so this is going to, that combination of Neptune and Uranus, is very much dreaming of insurrection. The force of the insurrection, the force of Uranus, I see as being dampened and made and dissolved by Neptune. Neptune is sort of like a dissolving agent, an emollient. You see, it's really going to dampen and make it's going to weaken the effect of Uranus here, which is in Capricorn. Uranus in Capricorn obviously wants to shake up those Capricornian boundaries and structures. You see, Neptune is making that a little bit weaker. So, but Pluto, the foreigner, is conjunct that now. So perhaps that Uranus will be a little bit bolder in expressing itself, and I think that in fact it will be. The Moon right now, where it's transiting in Gemini, is falling in the natal 5th house of the Ukraine. It shows what the people are thinking about, what's preoccupying the people's thoughts, and its 5th house matters. I often interpret the 5th house as being a sexual house and dealing with children, but what it really is how you express yourself. It has an entrepreneurial sort of color to it. It's your baby. And so the Moon in Gemini, the people are thinking very intellectually about, Ukraine in a selfish way for once. Now, unfortunately, looking at that chart, how does this fit into the overall plan? It doesn't. It seems to me that Ukraine's karma, where they're supposed to be going right now, in terms of the overall global picture of things, is right back to Mother Russia. I get this information from the nodes, which are on a difficult axis in the Ukrainian natal chart. Let me pull that up.
Stephen, one of the things that struck me was that nodal axis and the pressure it's under at the moment by the Uranus-Pluto square, which also includes Jupiter at the moment, the T-square. But just for people's reference, there's been a lot of discussion amongst astrologers about the transiting square between Uranus and Pluto, and the tensions and obstacles that brings. Obviously, in any person's chart, we have to look at the full picture. So it's occurring in all of our charts because it's a universal transit. Uranus in the sky is squaring Pluto in the sky, so it affects us all. But the extent to which it impacts a person not only is described by their major progressed aspects, but by the areas of the chart affected. And when I look at the Ukraine's chart, we see that Pluto, the transformation and churning energy, churning desire for change, need for change, but somehow meddling from abroad secretively because it's in the 12th house of secrets and secret enemies. But it's right on top of that node, that north node. Therefore, the square to Uranus is squaring the node. So Uranus is in the bends of the Ukrainian chart, which is problematic, and it's going to take some time for that to settle down because Uranus goes backwards and forwards and moves slowly. So this is not going to resolve itself quickly, and it is very tense. But Stephen, I wanted to say to you that when I look at Russia, I don't feel that this situation is particularly dramatic for Russia. It is for the Ukraine, obviously, and that's just reflected in the charts. But I look at Russia and look at their progressions, look at their transits, etc., and think, well, they're probably not going to come off too badly in this. I don't think they're that worried. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I draw your attention, everybody listening, if you have the chart, to Russia's natal chart. If you look at her natal Venus in Scorpio in the 4th house, that 4th house, it represents the Russian home. It also represents Russia's public buildings, its airports, its public restrooms, its gymnasiums, etc., etc. This is Venus, and Venus in Scorpio. This Venus hoards things. It hoards secrets. So the artists of Russia are secretive artists. They're propaganda instruments, and it makes me immediately you think of Pussy Riot. And I've always wanted an excuse to say that on the air, and that band from Russia gave it to me. Thank you for that, Pussy Riot. This is not Venus in 4th house. The reason why they are so controversial is because they're not propagandists. They're artists There are Venuses who try to be, who try to keep it real, according, forgive me for using the old jargon. They try to keep it honest. But Venus in Russia, the artist the culture in Russia is going to be a function of propaganda. So it doesn't matter what we here in America say about Russia when the average Russian, who matters more to President Putin than we do, goes to turn on the TV, they're going to get what they want to hear. And for the average Russian, Ukraine is a very exotic place. It has a certain they've romanticized it. Okay, for them, it's something very important.
Interestingly, Stephen, that Venus in the 4th house of Russia's chart is squared by Saturn.
Right.
So you're spot on. And
yeah.
I was listening to some reports on the radio earlier this week about the Russian media, and members of the public were saying, we don't hear the truth in our media. The Russian media is even more manipulated than the American media, far more.
Yeah, I mean, Russia may have shed the skin of communism, but from this chart I'm looking at, there's still a lot of the old ways that are being exercised here. The Russian is nowhere near as free as he thinks, and the average Russian, she knows that what I'm saying is the truth because she lives that reality. Even though I'm sure there will be a gazillion Russians who will write to me and say, you're full of malarkey, Stephen. I'm a Russian, and I can do this, that, and the other. Well, sure you can. You can do that, all that you want, as long as you're not gay while you're doing it and want to be open about it, or as long as you're not anti-Putin regime and want to be open about it. You can do all those things. Malarkey. There's not much freedom going on there right now, and so they're going to need that Venus in Scorpio to keep the people placid and tractable.
Well, actually, Stephen, it brings me to another point, because I think your observation is really interesting. This question about freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, etc. in Russia, and the freedom of the Ukrainian people to say, well, I want to be part of Russia, or no, I don't want us to be part of Russia. We're the Ukraine. We're separate. Or the Tatars saying, well, this is our homeland. We were kicked out once. We're not being kicked out again. We're back here, and we're here to stay. But when you progress the Russian chart, and this is a young chart, December 8th, 1991. The moon, the common people,
mm-hmm.
and the nation's impulses is now it's conjunct that progressed Uranus. So that to me says that there is an underlying desire for change in Russia. I think that the Russian people, if you think of Pussy Riot, and they're not typical of the average Russian, but I think that there is a desire for some change, some freedom of expression, etc. in Russia. It's described by that moon and Uranus in the progressed chart, but Pluto is right. Transiting Pluto, transformation is right on top of that point. And I wonder if in actual fact part of the game here with the Ukraine is creating some external distraction or something to unify the people and feeling within Russia, because that's what the chart says to me.
Yeah. Pluto in Capricorn is going to be there to enforce the status quo, which is Capricorn. In the 6th house of servants, Russia's servants, not Russia's children. Russia's children are cooperating, and so they're left alone. But the Ukraine is not cooperating. The Ukraine is a servant. First of all, it's not a child. It's a servant. These are distinct categories of diplomatic affairs for Russia, and Pluto is in that category of servants. So he's there to enforce the status quo, which is Capricornian. The moon, where the progressed moon, where the heart and soul of the Russian people is at right now, that's in Scorpio. It's progressed from its place in Capricorn, what I referred to as the gulag worker, this sort of past memory of working for Mother Russia. That's progressed now to Scorpio, so it wants to hoard some power for it. It has power urges of its own, in its own home, because progressed moon is in the 4th house of home. The people in Russia want to be able to do in their home as they please, and sometimes they want to turn on the TV and have it free of, something that's quasi Stalinist propaganda. They want some more autonomy. They want more power, more emotional power. They want to feel that everything's going to be all right. They don't feel that everything's all right now, and they shouldn't, because their ascendant very soon is about to progress into Virgo, and Russia as an entity in modern politics is going to be faced with a lesson. It's going to be time to work now. It's going to be in a position that the Ukraine is sort of in, because its sun is in Virgo. All those comments I made about its sun being in Virgo and its people being pushed toward servitude and labor. Well, now Russia's ascendant very soon, in a couple of years, is going to be progressed into that arena as well. So it's like Russia is writing a big check right now in the global marketplace, and in a couple of years, it's going to have to cash that check, and it's going to have to work to do it. When the ascendant progresses into Virgo, Russia as a country is going to enter into a sort of apprenticeship period. Remember, what its ultimate goal is to get that American ideal of Sagittarian expansion and freedom. It wants what it's seen in American movies. It wants to become Rambowski. And to do that, its ascendant is about to enter into the first degree of Virgo, so it's going to set to work. This is that part in The Karate Kid where Daniel San had to start painting the house. And this is the part in any martial arts movie where the hero goes into, super training mode. And you know what I'm saying? He starts doing all sorts of impressive feats. And I think we actually lost Stephen. Sorry. We are at the mercy of the technological gods. Stephen, are you there? Let's see if we can get Stephen back on the call. Now, what was I saying before I rudely interrupted myself? Let's see. There we go. Add him to group call. Okay, he's coming back. Sorry about that, guys. Stephen, you with us?
I am, yes. I'm sorry. I lost my Skype access, Stephen.
That's all right. We're talking junk about Uranus, and Uranus is coming back to kick our butts on it. It's quite all right, man. Okay, what were we talking before Uranus rudely? See, that's the nature of Uranus. It's sudden, it's unexpected, and it's electrical.
Yes, and Skype need to deal with it.
That's right. We're gonna stick Rambowski on you.
Yes.
Well, at any rate, we were talking about Russia's progressions. The Russian people have progressed into Scorpio by now. And, this is going to show a sort of an innate need, an instinct for more emotional power, the need to feel that everything is all right. And the ascendant is going into Virgo. The Russian people are about to work hard at getting that objective. I think before you left the stage there, Steve, I mentioned that Russia is writing a check now, and in a couple of years it's going to have to cash it by doing actual work.
Well, it's interesting that progressed moon, the people in Scorpio, is now squaring the ascendant. So again, you see, that indicates to me that there is some underlying tension between the regime, the people, the leadership.
Yeah, there is definitely underlying tension, and that square is also going to inflame all of these things I've just talked about. The desire of the Russian population for emotional security is going to inflame that Leo ascendant of Russia, that it shows the world, its public face as a country, as a government. That's going to be inflamed by the Russian people's need for emotional security. And it's going to affect the way that they go out into the world. Because, see, let's talk about that Russian ascendant. In Leo, the way it does diplomacy, the way it presents itself, it's going to be looking for influence. And it's going to want to hoard things. Being a fixed sign, it's going to want to hoard things like glory and honors. It's going to want to rack up a lot of distinctions and accolades, and that's what's happening in the Ukraine. There's a Hitlerian concept of Lebensraum here, breathing space, living room. You know what I'm saying? Living room, because the Ukraine.
Yeah, well, the president, the current president of the Ukraine, the acting president, actually said on TV, "Are you trying to start World War III? This is how world wars begin." because the Russians literally just marched into Crimea and annexed it. I know that their excuse is, well, there are a lot of Russian-speaking people there, and if they are under threat, it's our responsibility to help them. But does that mean that, you know, if there was some unrest in Canada, we would say, well, these are English-speaking people, it's our responsibility to go in and annex that part of Canada? You just don't do that in this day and age. It's 2014, and I think the Russians are overly bellicose, or their leadership was overly bellicose, overly expansive, and it's a mistake. But sadly, I don't think it's a mistake that's going to cost them that much in the short term.
No, that's in the short term. I would expect things to go quite well for them. They're going to press with their expansion, and unfortunately, the way this thing is set up, the dynamics of Sagittarius, the Sun in Sagittarius, that retrograde Mercury that is damaged in Sagittarius, they're going to say anytime that we try to, America or the West tries to talk to Russia and logically about this, they're going to be like, who are you guys to judge? England with your slave trade, America with your slave trade and displacing the Aboriginal peoples who had lived there, who had lived, as Kurt Vonnegut put it, quite happy and contented and fulfilling lives there for thousands of years. Who are you to tell me, to preach to me about this? So this is the cunning of Russia. This is very cunning. This is going to be the justification that they use for their expansionist policy.
Well, I thought that the whole stance, the Russian stance or Putin's stance around the dreadful situation in Syria, it seemed to me that stance was very cunning. That there was an agenda, a hidden agenda there, and obviously the Russians or Putin don't want us to be even more present in the Middle East than we have been, for goodness sake. But I think that we should have done something about the problem in Syria, far more than we have done, and I feel quite ashamed that we haven't, Stephen. I'm not sure what your view is, but it's just quite interesting that was Putin's stance just recently, and now we've got this situation in the Ukraine, which seemed to be well planned. I don't see how you end up with 40,000 troops on the border of the Ukraine by chance.
We didn't learn anything from our diplomacy efforts with the Russians during the Cold War. I dare say we probably underestimated the Russians. We have to keep in mind that this is an ancient culture. And let me just say this. In my time, I have worked at sea on ships, and I have had the benefit of befriending many, many Russians. I've known them to be generous, warm, intelligent, very and attractive people. As if that's important. But to me, hey, I'm a Leo. It's important. What can I say? Attractive, intelligent people. They flooded into the Ukraine to populate it. Okay, and this is why I'm saying that President Putin is going to play what you guys did at card. There is an ethnic Russian majority there, but it's contrived. It's engineered. It wasn't. This too is Hitlerian. It's Nazi-esque. Stalin encouraged migration and settlement of the Ukraine in the 40s, and he displaced the native population in order to effect that. So again, this is very much a story of identities and identity crises. It's a story of displacement and return, and it's going to be a conflict of return. And the poor Crimean Tatars, who have the most ancestral claim to that territory, they don't have the numbers really to affect any sort of defense other than the typical underdog, martyred, sacrificial type of effort, unfortunately. And so it's going to, and you know, we should have, with Russia, we should have responded a little bit more forcefully with diplomacy. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that because we had exhausted a lot of our potency in questionable wars, or wars of questionable importance.
Yes.
What we really should have done was bopped his nose when we had the chance. We didn't do that, and with with a personality like the natal chart I'm looking at here for Russia, if you don't do that, then they're going to be encouraged by weakness, just like Hitler was, and they're going to press forward with their own agenda.
It's sad that the terminology associated with terrorism, terrorists, the war on terror, which the Bush administration used to a huge degree, as we know, now in these local conflicts, local problems, we hear that term used, and the whole perception of the war on terror that is used in a manipulative manner. So if you look at Syria, the government saying, well, we're dealing with terrorists in our own nation. We're going to suppress terrorists. Terrorists are bad. Terrorists should be suppressed. So they're using that excuse. And then you've got the Russians talking about terrorism, and the Ukrainians talking about terrorism, and the word is just bounced around left, right, and center, and becomes completely confusing and part of the whole political game. But I found it interesting that today, Stephen, I think it was yesterday, the Russians requested an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council because the Ukrainian military was going in to seize control of a building or a town center or something in the east of the Ukraine, and the Russians were saying, the Ukrainians are now using their own military against their own people.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they're twisting the Western stance.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that's bad. Twisting it to their own advantage.
Yeah, they are. That's part of what I meant too by that 12th house, that 12th house Saturn in the Ukrainian natal chart. How I said it creeps away from the ascendant and sort of strains backward into confinement. You know what I'm saying? These are actions on the part of that country that get in its own way. And the reason it's getting in its own way is because it doesn't really want autonomy yet. Karmically, it's not the time for Ukraine to have that autonomy. Looking at the nodal axis, the south node, which is what one is to avoid, which is what one is supposed to be moving away from karmically, is in the 6th house of skill. The north node, showing what one is supposed to be moving toward, is in the 12th house of self-undoing. You know, and I'm reminded in nature, self-destruction is an honored and useful and often used tool in nature, by Mother Nature, by our own bodies. It's called cellular apoptosis. Cells are designed to self-destruct, to commit suicide, as it were. If they didn't, then we'd have a cancer, you see. And so this is obviously a necessary period of turmoil in Ukraine's history so that it can develop an identity crisis and become something, once again, that is not Muscovite, that is not Russian, do you see?
Well, another factor is, to that point, is that when you look at the first house of self-image or identity in the Ukrainian chart, it's intercepted. So Pisces is intercepted. So the whole vision for the Ukraine is unclear. Its identity is unclear.
Yeah.
And its moon, the common people in Aquarius, is individualistic moon, an independent moon there in Aquarius is embedded in that first house. So the whole identity of the nation is unclear. But I do think that the population or the confusion in the population is a big part of this dynamic or this problem, Stephen, because when you look at that moon in Aquarius in the Ukrainian chart in the first house of self-identity, it's opposed by Mercury. In actual fact, when you look at the moon in the Ukrainian chart, it's powerful, but it's hugely discordant. So it's very problematic. So the dynamics between the people are challenging, And the chart says Moon opposition Mercury. People don't quite know what they want.
No, they don't. The Aquarius is challenging for the Moon, because the Moon is your body. It's the raw materials that your mother, it's what your mother gave you. It's the thing, it's the moneymaker that you shake, according to that song. That's the Moon. It's your body. And to have it in Aquarius, which is collectivist, which is humanitarian, which cares more about the collective and the mass of society instead of the individual, that's a challenge. That's troublesome. So the emotions they lose their pungence in Aquarius. The emotions are distributed among all humanity, all Ukrainians. That's why Aquarius is a very natural fit for communist ideology and collectivist ideology. And the Moon is there in the first house. These people would have been excellent communists in their day. And again, looking at that seventh house, which shows the Ukraine's diplomatic relationships, we see all these planets there: Mercury, Jupiter, Venus. Now, Mercury is retrograde. Look at the eighth house. Mars is there. This is one of the only points of virility and potency in the Ukrainian chart. This Mars in Virgo, and it's disposited by Mercury. Now, Russia thinks about this Mars. This Mars is it's an insurgency, is essentially what it is, and it rules the third house of short journeys. Do you see? And it also rules Scorpio, which Scorpio is intercepted somewhere in this chart, isn't it? Yeah, in the ninth house. So at any rate, it's an insurgency type of a Mars, and it's disposited by Mercury. It's in Mercury sign. Look at the Mercury retrograde. This is a traitorous Mercury. So this is a double agent sort of a Mercury. This is somebody who is close to the insurgency. And it's going to be a firebrand preacher. Mercury's in Leo. I wrote an article here recently about the cult leader, David Koresh, and he also has Mercury in Leo. And it's a firebrand. It's that sort of ideological preaching. So this person would be very, very open and fervent about the Ukrainian cause. He would be respected in the insurgency. But look, he goes back to Russia because his placement in Russia's chart is in the first house of Russia's body, and he's retrograde.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting as well that you've got that Moon in the first house in Aquarius, that independence-seeking Moon, but that's quite confusing and a little erratic. So you have that on the one hand in the first house in the Ukrainian chart, but opposed by that Mercury in Leo that you described, that Mercury retrograde. I don't find that Mercury functions well in the later degrees of a fire sign, and obviously when it's retrograde, even less. But the nation's Mercury is in the seventh house of foreign nations and their attitudes, the house of international disputes. And we've got that tricky Mercury. Because for our listeners, Stephen, Mercury is the magician card in the tarot deck, in the major arcana. And you see this beautiful card of this seemingly very powerful magician, logical, rational ability to manifest. But the magician card is also the trickster.
Yeah.
So Mercury can be the trickster. So you've got the people who are confused, who are not sure what their identity is. Collectively, they're not sure what they want. And because of the opposition to Mercury, they don't necessarily articulate clearly or easily the direction that they want to take. They haven't necessarily got it together. But that tricky Mercury in the House of Foreign Nations, Stephen, and their attitudes means to me that other nations, like be it Russia or the US, are tricky. What they're doing is not necessarily about the Ukrainian people. I don't think the Russians are really that bothered about the Ukrainian people because this Mercury opposes the Moon, the people, and I don't think the American policymakers or lawmakers are that concerned about the Ukrainian people because, again, this Mercury is tricky and it opposes the people. So I think all of the communication, all of the negotiation, all of the dealings on an international scale, it's all about everybody's own tricky little agenda and not really about the Ukrainian people.
It's not, and foreign intervention into the affairs of Ukraine are simply going to speed Ukraine's fall, and Ukraine is destined to take a fall. This is shown by the nodal axis, as far as I'm concerned, and Pluto, the powerful foreigner, is both trine and sextile that axis. And what this means is that we're going to, unfortunately, accidentally sort of speed the Ukraine along toward this karmic sort of destiny, and it's going to undergo some growing pains as it travels through this identity crisis that it's in. It's going to come at great pain, but it's too early for me to say whether or not there's going to be an ultimately positive resolution, because I'm convinced we're looking at a process here that's going to span a decade at least, and it's going to be a big player in what happens to us as Americans in other world affairs.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious from the progressions that we somehow later this year or early next year, we somehow slap a Band-Aid on this situation. The Band-Aid kind of creeps off in the middle of July next year for some reason. We slap it back on again with a bit of antiseptic cream, and it hangs on there until we get to 2018, when we're likely to be having global economic problems far worse than we've had previously. And then in 2020s, we see the subject of our book. Tell people a little bit about that book, Stephen.
Well, it's going to consider, first of all, geopolitics from a comprehensive perspective. We're going to try to, sort of knit together a gestalt, an overview of not only just Russia and the Ukraine, but also the West, America and the UK and the European Union, and how we have to remember Russia isn't weighing in on this situation by itself. Am I still there?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Skype's got me nervous. Russia has help here. There's China to think of. And I'm convinced, we can talk about this in a future show on this, Steve, if you'd like, that Mercury retrograde, young Mercury, I'm convinced that's an image of North Korea, quite frankly. What do you think about that, actually, that idea? It's a child of Russia. It's young.
Yes. Yeah, it hasn't got any friends.
Nope, it's foreign, too. Sagittarius is inherently, one of the reasons the ninth house is associated with foreign things is because Sagittarius is the ninth sign, you see. So this is a foreigner. So that could be North Korea, who knows?
It could be, and I know that in our initial analyses of the energies in the 2020s, early 2020s, it seemed that many, many nations were kicking off at that time, and North Korea was definitely on the list.
Right.
So I think that North Korea will be used secretly as a bit of a puppet, but I think that the true collaboration is potentially between the Russians and the Chinese.
Oh, yes.
And Iran.
I want to emphasize to those listening that for these symbols, they often do double, triple, quadruple, quintuple, sextuple duty. So Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius can at once represent North Korea as a child of Russia. And it can also represent a young and upcoming party member of some sort who is a traitor, do you see? So it can represent also a third thing, the country Russia's general ability, how it communicates itself. And so we nest the hierarchies of meaning into these symbols. Wouldn't you say, Steve?
Absolutely. You could just go on and on and on with the analyses. I think that's what's so exciting about astrology in the metaphysical field, Stephen. I want people to know that we are astrologers, but we're metaphysicians first and foremost. But I think when you get into really complex dynamics between nations, or really complex dynamics and timelines within a person's life, astrology is so accurate, it's just wonderful. But we're also interested in many other areas in the metaphysical domain.
Absolutely. I would like also to emphasize that when we talk about things like progressions, we're referring to those tri-wheel charts, the big fancy ones in the Study Charts album on the Metaphysical Media Group Facebook page. So when we talk about, for example, Pluto in Russia's chart, there are actually 3 Plutos. There's the Pluto at birth, the natal Pluto. Then there's progressed Pluto, Pluto's movements through the progressions. And then finally there's a 3rd Pluto, where Pluto is actually at right now on May the 2nd, 2014. You see, so that's the sort of chart we're talking about when we refer to progressions, and it gives us a more comprehensive picture of what Russia and what the Ukraine are going to encounter as they mature and evolve, and as this situation develops.
Also, Stephen, one of the things that I was thinking about before the show was people who were born around the same time as the Ukraine and Russia. So
right.
People born around 1990, 1991, maybe even 1989, I'm not sure, I'd have to check, they're experiencing this challenging Uranian square.
Yes, they are. These are generational types of energy. These planets move so slowly, and that's why they affect entire generations. But they can become specific to the individual by their aspects and also by their house placement.
So if we've got parents out there listening that have a kid that was born around the same time, around 1990, 1991, and they're displaying some of these complications that we're talking about in the context of Russia, so striving for independence and identity, etc. These are definitely some of the dynamics on the agenda in people born around that time frame. But obviously, to fully understand them, we have to analyze the whole chart. I think it's useful to explain to people. I loved your explanation about progressions, Stephen, but I like people to understand that we really start with the natal chart as we did with the Ukraine and Russia, because with any entity, whether it's a person, a nation, or even a weather system, you look at the natal chart because it shows you what's possible, what's highly likely, and then the progressions add a boost of energy to that, but they're adding a boost of energy to that natal chart. So if there's no energy in a certain area of that chart, even a boost is not necessarily going to make something happen, and then the transits show us when those energies are likely to be triggered into events.
Very true, absolutely. And that's an important point to bring up, because to a large, you can't escape the fact, to a large extent, there are going to be people born with a lot of these characteristics of Uranus and of Neptune that these countries are going through. But it all ties back to the natal chart. So what Saturn represents in Russia's birth chart, or your birth chart, or mine, in its transits, it's going to represent the same thing. So if it pertains to your finances, then it's not going to have any significance in transit really to your children or to your creative works, for example. It's going to have that significance that's tied into the natal figure, which is the original stamp of creation. And then this really gets into the spiritual, philosophical aspects of astrology, how the original ideas that come from heaven, how they percolate down through various degrees of materiality until they manifest as an event. This is a broad area of astrological thought, and it pays to delve into it. It's a lot of what we do here. We like it,
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of C.C. Zane, Steve, and I know you are as well.
I am. Love that.
But I wish that C.C. Zane was still here on the Earth plane, that we could have him on the show, or that we could study with him. What an amazing man. But I love the way Zane described astrology, the Earth plane, the conscious self, the conscious mind, and then the unconscious. So I want listeners to understand that whenever we're working with astrology, we're looking at the unconscious. So we may be looking at an individual, and we are a little later in the show going to look at one of our listeners' charts and provide insight for her. But whether we're looking at an individual or a collective entity like a nation, when we're working with the astrology, we're looking at the full picture. We're looking at the unconscious. And the unconscious doesn't reside here on the physical plane. So you're born into this world for your experience and growth here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a physical body because you can't be here without one. It's a little bit like trying to go deep sea diving without an oxygen tank. You need it. It's perilous to be without it. And when the physical body perishes, we revert fully to the astral plane. We leave the Earth plane and we don't require a body anymore. You don't require that oxygen tank. But the soul or the unconscious self doesn't exist within the physical body or on the earth plane. It exists on the astral plane. And I find it interesting, Stephen, when we speak with clients about life after death, and the people often feel, oh well, when I die, when I pass to spirit, I will leave here and I will go to spirit. Well, they're already in spirit. We're already there.
Yeah.
We're just also here. And when we look at astrology, we're looking at what's occurring on the astral plane, what's occurring within your spirit or within the spirit of Russia or the Ukraine. And because everything occurs first or takes shape first on the astral plane within the unconscious, we're able to look into the future and see what is likely to download into the physical world at any different point in time.
Absolutely. I mean, and the key word there is likely. You know, I think ultimately at heart we deal in celestial statistics, the celestial probabilities. You know what I mean, Steve? This is what is probably going to happen based on our experience examining lots of charts like this one. And that's one reason why I really like C.C. Zane's approach to metaphysics, is because, you know, we're both educated people. And his attitude is very rational, oriented towards the concrete, which I like. And it's very useful. And I appreciate that much about it. Now, his way of doing astrology, I don't do it quite that way because I chose a different system. One has to choose one way and, you know, just sort of focus on that for a while. But I admire it quite a bit, and then I reserve the right to use aspects of it when I see that the situation calls for it.
There's so much that hasn't been researched yet. There's so much work to do.
There is, and we're going to do as much of it as we can here at Metaphysical Media Group. Well, what do you say we start talking about Denise's chart in a little bit here, Steve? Because I think we are about done with Ukraine and Russia, unless you had more that you wanted to add.
No, I think that's great. I wanted to just remind our listeners, Stephen, that
sure,
they should feel free to contact us if they have ideas about future shows. So if they want us to talk about Iran, or they want us to look at North Korea or anything in particular, they can email us and do that via the Blog Talk radio profile or via our websites. And also, you can visit our website. So if you want to know more about Stephen, go to thegingerpsychic.com, and my website is stephenframpton.com. That's Stephen with a V, and Frampton is Frampton. Remember to join us on the Facebook page, Metaphysical Media Group, because Stephen's put some brilliant charts and information on there this week in preparation for our show, and we'll also post our blogs on there. You can sign up for our blogs on our website as well. And we are going to look at one of our listeners' charts. So if you would like us to look at your situation, or you have questions you'd like us to answer, then again, you can contact us. We can't promise that we'll be able to do everything, but we'll definitely take your requests into consideration, Steve, right?
Absolutely. I would love to emphasize that Metaphysical Media Group is about education as well. And so you'll find a lot of educational materials up there. You'll find links to courses. If you want, for example, in-depth courses with Steve, we'll post links to that. And it'll be a resource where you can find all the study charts for the topics that we talk about. You'll find a lot of articles that Steve and I author on the topic of astrology and other metaphysical topics. So it'll be a great resource for education and expanding your horizons when it comes to esoteric matters.
And maybe, Stephen, you and I could at some stage create an online program about mundane astrology so that people can actually study mundane astrology and get even more out of the shows with an understanding of
right.
Mundane
Well,
astrology. I think that's very doable.
For that matter, in your book, Thinking Completely Outside the Box, also has a lot of background material and educational sorts of material that we use in our analyses as well, and you can pick that up at Amazon.com for sure.
Yes, but I think our book that we produce together will be far better. I'm so excited about that. But is there anything else you wanted to say, Stephen, about blogs or your site or anything before we start talking about Denise?
No, I think you covered the waterfront, my friend. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, great. Well, I've got Denise's information here with me, Stephen. I know you have as well.
Yes.
And you quite rightly pointed out that we use some different techniques. But how should we handle this? Should we spend 10, 15 minutes each talking about Denise? Or do you want to do it together? I don't mind either way.
I tell you what, why don't you go ahead and let's hear your observations, and then we'll do mine, and we'll have some time left over to ask each other questions about how we arrived at our conclusions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, just as a reminder for everybody, we invited you last week to contact us if you wanted us to take a look at your charts and provide insight for you. And so Denise wrote to us saying that she'd love to take us up on that. Now, Stephen, I don't recall seeing any particular questions from Denise. Do you?
No, she didn't. I don't think she had anything specific in mind. So,
okay. Well, then, what I suggest, Stephen, is why don't we handle it this way? If I spend a good few minutes talking about Denise's natal chart, her soul, her unconscious self, and then maybe you take some time to do the same, and then we can actually look at what's on the horizon for Denise and do the same thing, but looking out to the future.
Sure. Sounds great.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to say about Denise is that her chart is harmonious. So whenever we look at an entity, and Denise is an entity, as I am, as America is, as Stephen is, we look at where there's harmony and where there's discord. Where there's harmony, you generally display the more positive characteristics of the sign or the house or the planet in question. And where there's discord, we generally have some learning to do, some opportunity to grow or improve. But I'm happy to say that Denise's chart overall is nicely harmonious. And when I look at the elements in her chart, Stephen, I observed that she's got a huge dose of earth in her. So she's 46.5% earth element, and the earth element in her is extremely harmonious. So we're talking about a lady or girl that is extremely organized, pragmatic, earthed, and that's confirmed again by the breakdown of the signs of the zodiac in her chart, because her most powerful sign of the zodiac is Capricorn. Let me see, her sun is actually in Aquarius, but Aquarius is not her most powerful sign of the zodiac. So if you were to read about yourself, Denise, using some really good astrology tools, then you start with Capricorn. So you're a good manager, a good leader. You're great at setting an example, at showing people the way, at getting people organized. So these are strengths in you that you should leverage in your life, in your career. And we say where there's most harmony in a person's chart is where they'll get most bang for their buck career-wise. Your second sign of the zodiac, second most powerful sign of the zodiac is Virgo. That makes you analytical. It makes you, again, organized, somebody that works methodically. Virgo is the sign of service. It's associated with the term the Virgin Mary. So people that have a good dose of Virgo, when it's harmonious, they want to be of service in the world. And not only is Virgo your second sign of the zodiac, second most powerful, it rules your ascendant, your physical body, your outer personality, your identity. So again, you express yourself in the world as somebody that's organized, that's rational, etc. You have a nicely powerful Pluto in a very, very powerful, prominent part of your chart. And Pluto in a person, when it's harmonious, is the best of the best when it comes to connecting with spirit, when it comes to mediumship specifically. So we're not talking just necessarily about an extrasensory perception or making predictions, but it gives you a strong connection to spirit for yourself, and potentially a good dose of mediumistic ability. And your second most powerful house is the 12th, which is the house of the unconscious, amongst other things. And because that Pluto, as well as Uranus, sit in that 12th house, you've got a good connection to spirit and a good ability to communicate with other realms. Your best house is the 5th house. It's very powerful and extremely harmonious, and that's the house of fun, of romance, of children, of creativity and speculation. So these are prominent themes in your life as well. And I would say you're a very creative, very loving person, because your most powerful planet, the ascendant aside, we do treat the ascendant as a planet in hermetic astrology, but your most powerful planet after the ascendant is Venus, which makes you a loving, creative person. And as I said, you've got a great chart. I would say for Denise, Stephen, when it comes to career, it's quite likely that she would work for herself, or wants to work for herself, or even have a dual career, because in the midheavens in Gemini, the twins, we often see a dual path, and her 6th house of employment is ruled by Uranus, which is that independent, individualistic streak as well. I've got lots more I can say, Stephen, but I want you to chip in as well. I think the challenge is always we have so much information and so little time to go through it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And wow, that was really a huge amount of data that you uncovered there. And let's see, wow, how could I input here what you've said? How can I react to that? Well, you mentioned Virgo. The ascendant is in Virgo. This is definitely important. The earth element is indeed quite harmonious, and I would have to concur. Denise is probably either A, in business for herself, or B, daydreaming and has always wanted to go into business for herself, or C, is about to, or she definitely really should, with these 3 planets in the 5th house and in Capricorn as well. Saturn and the sign that he rules in Capricorn, Mars exalted in Capricorn. So with that Virgo rising, I would expect her, like you said, to be practical. She'd be matter of fact, with that primary motivation to achieve material security. This will be a person who tolerates routine very well, systematic person. Now, the ruler of the ascendant is Mercury, and is positioned in the 6th house in Aquarius. And so this shows a way that she's going to try to actually achieve that primary motivation of material security. She's going to do it through discussion and through ideologies and philosophies, perception of these things. Service to the community. Aquarius is very community oriented. So it's the perception, the service is going to be community oriented and sort of aloof and neutral. Now, Moon, Venus and Mars, they also aspect the ascendant. So they also they add information about how Denise is going to use what she's going to do in order to get this material security that's important to her, as shown by Virgo rising. So the 5th house and the 9th house. The moon is in the 9th house in Taurus, in the sign of its exaltation. This is a beautiful moon. Has a lot to say about her past incarnations, and we'll get to that in a bit. But Denise is going to use 9th house things to increase her material security. 9th house things such as higher education, university education of some sort, whether she formally went there or not, or got it on her own by studying books. but also spiritual things. The ninth house is the house of God. And I don't mean any sort of ritualized church expression, but it could be that, or it could be any sort of spiritual study in an intellectual level. Somehow this helps her achieve that material security as well. And fifth house things, which is entrepreneurial. Now, the thing about, there's a distinction between the Virgo ascendant and people with and the Virgo sun. The humility of the Virgo ascendant seems a bit more authentic, because the Virgo ascendant person is usually a little bit more ready to admit that, hey, I don't know it all. I'm not the best there is. I can improve on this thing. So the self-criticism of the Virgo ascendant tends to be a little bit healthier than it is with someone who has the Virgo sun. The Virgo ascendant person isn't just going to just, dwell at it. Now, I like to use a modern technique here, because this modern technique is sort of swift. The houses can be classified and by elements, first of all. So there are water houses: house 4, house 8, and house 12. These are the psychic trinity, the trinity of soul. And they deal with past lives, with the responses that have been conditioned inside of you based upon incarnating serially over the millennia, shedding bodies like a snake sheds skins, but keeping the same mind, where memories of experiences are accreting and gathering mass and becoming weighty. So the trinity of soul, these three houses, house 4, 8, 12, shows how a person is going to assimilate all of that stuff and make it useful to their life. Now, her water houses are in the fire element. There's a bit of an elemental incongruity there. So, I'm thinking a past life experience where there is some fire element. There could be some violence in the past life, as shown by Uranus in the 12th house in Leo. I would expect sporadic sorts of interruptions of power. Now, her moon is in Taurus. So this, again, her moon is similar to the Russian moon in the sense that it's in an earthy element. And this would indicate past lives as a worker, a laborer, but not a gulag worker. This isn't Capricorn. This is Taurus. So she would have been laboring in things that gave security to others: food, clothing, things of that sort. The soul of a worker. But the Uranus shows that there were sporadic interruptions, sporadic outbursts of power and dominance and violence in the past lives. So Denise's soul today is going to be trying to assimilate some of these disturbing psychic memories. And hopefully she's doing well with that. She's going to learn. We're going to talk about the Trinity of Fire in a bit, which shows how she searches for her identity. And we'll see then that it's wanting to understand the development and the evolution of her spirit. So the 12th house is cadent. It's all about learning. So that's how Denise is going to assimilate her past life experiences. It's how she's going to make those past lives useful to her by the means of input and exchange, distributing thoughts and observing things, learning, in other words. Now, the Trinity of Wealth. These deal with the speculations you gave us regarding the career, which I would definitely have to agree with, having that midheaven in Gemini. With the Mercury, the ruler of the midheaven, in Aquarius, and cadent in the 6th house, that could be a problem. The cadency of Mercury is a problem. His combustion to the sun is a problem. So there could be some blockages or challenges when it comes to realizing the primary objective sometimes. Maybe the communication is off or the perception is off on occasion, but it wouldn't be anything major. Now, the Trinity of Wealth, the earth houses. House number 2, house number 6, and house number 10. These are all in the air element for Denise. So here we have, again, the sociability and relationship. These are vital to her wealth and to her material security. This is someone who is going to have to detach herself from the daily experiences of her financial and career life in order to get objectivity and perspective. She's going to need a rational approach. Having the Trinity of Wealth in the air signs like this, I'd expect her to put this detachment and objectivity, etc., into getting career and finances. She's going to live mentally in these areas. She's going to be able to visualize things, and she's going to be a communicator in order to get money, in order to get jobs and careers, etc. Communicating on the job is going to be very important. So also the trinity of wealth in the air signs shows how Denise is going to try to satisfy her basic needs. Okay, so intellectualism is going to be vital to her in just about all areas, I'm thinking. Sociability too. Even though with planets in the trinity of soul, this often gives an urge to privacy. We also have Jupiter in the 4th house in Sagittarius, so she's going to be a private person, I would expect, but still fairly sociable. With the Sun, Mercury, and Chiron in the 6th house, it'll be her service and her skills that she'll be able to put to use in order to deal with the material reality and generate cash. I agree with you 100%. She'll definitely have an ability to manage resources well. This is in addition to that testimony of the Saturn in Capricorn. Now, the 6th house is cadence, so there's going to be an emphasis on learning through immediate experience with the material plane. And that includes not only finances, but the body as well. Learning about the body's limitations and what the body needs through the means of health problems. So there will be a lot of education for Denise about the limitations and the needs of her own body through little problems that she might have with her health, also doing the everyday performance of routine. These sorts of things are going to give her loads of practical insight into herself. So the thing to remember with having this trinity of wealth in the air signs is that there's going to be some purification and refinement, because the 6th house deals with that. So there's going to be a refinement of Denise's skills. That's going to be very vital in this incarnation, refinement and a purification of her skills as well. I think the important karmic lesson here for Denise is to learn humility in how she uses her skills with others in order to get the material needs that she and the rest of us have. Now, the trinity of life are the fire houses, houses 1, 5, and 9. These are going to show how Denise learns about her identity. You see, it's going to show her attitude toward life and how she experiences life itself, her sense of vitality. And we're going to see where her hopes are and what she yearns for. Now, the trinity of life, these are in the earth element. And there's sort of a systemic elemental incongruity here, meaning the trinity of water is in the fire element, the trinity of air is in the earth elements, etc. And these necessarily don't mix well with those elements. The earth signs in these fiery or in these houses, they're not going to work out. Now here we have the trinity of life, and house 1 is in Virgo, house 5 Capricorn, house 9 in Taurus. This is going to be caution and conservatism affecting the attitude toward life, and the experience of vitality is probably going to be dampened a little bit. So the faith and confidence are going to be the keynotes here in discovering her identity. She's going to have to focus on developing more faith in herself, more confidence in herself. And so it's also about hope and inspirations, what motivates her, you see. And so she's motivated and hoping for entrepreneurial things, the 5th house. This is what she's going to project into the world as a measure of success, one's entrepreneurial drive, I would imagine. Any of the 5th house meanings could be significant here. It's going to revolve around the people, our children, and the things that we create, artworks, and the people that we love. It has to do with love affairs that we have with people as well. And so these have to do with identity. I'm wrapping up here, Stephen. I'll get your opinions about some of my comments here, and we'll mix a little bit of what we said and do some forecasting. Now, the 5th house being succeedent shows how she's going to get security in the area of her identity, and it's going to be through Saturn in Capricorn, Mars in Capricorn, Venus. It's going to be, I'm speculating, through private enterprise or through artworks of some kind, or children, or perhaps through love affairs, but probably through a business of some sort. Now, the 5th house has to do with gambling and speculation, and the problem here with the identity is that it's security conscious and cautious, so she's not going to really benefit much from gambling or speculating about things. The challenge here will be to allow herself to take risks a little bit more often, because a rigid identity structure is not secure. You see, an unchanging sense of self is insecure. So, taking risks every once in a while, common sense risks, is good for the sense of identity. And the ninth house with that moon in Taurus, which I said was the incarnations of work, of toil and labor, that's also learning about her identity. The ninth house is cadent, and it's in the fire trinity of houses. So she's learning about her identity, who she was and who she is. Now, I could keep going with this about the relationships and the intellect. The main thing with that is we have Neptune in the trinity of relationship in the third house. So she's going to be learning in relationships about deception, how to deal with deception, but also looking at this from the entrepreneurial angle. The third house is the house of consulting and advertising. So she's going to be learning about image as well with Neptune here, the proper image, how to communicate properly with her public. And it shows how Denise's mind functions as well, that she could be prone to daydreaming. So that's what I got for Denise, Steve.
Yeah, fantastic. A couple of things I forgot to mention were, I think that Denise would do better working independently than she would in a partnership. Yeah. So if Denise were my client and she said, look, I'm going to invest everything I've made or invest my nest egg in a business partnership, I'd be saying, Denise, I think you'd be better off working as a one-man or one-woman band. That's one of the things I would say to her. And the other thing I'd say is that it's very important in this lifetime for Denise that she learns to ensure that she has balance and harmony rather than compromising that through relationships, whether that's a business relationship or a personal relationship. And it's particularly important that she ensures she's got balance, harmony, and the things that she needs financially, rather than allowing any form of relationship or partnership to drain her assets. But when you were talking about past lives, Stephen, my guides chipped in and said to me that Denise was actually in spirit for 30 years before she reincarnated back into this lifetime. Oh. And yeah, that's what I was given. But the other thing that's interesting is that when you were talking about that, my guide said to me that the cause of Denise's passing was actually to do with a sibling, and there was some deception or betrayal from caused by a sibling in her previous life, and it's quite possible that she would even have been poisoned. So it's important that she ensures that she is her source of balance in this world, that she makes sure that she's taken care of, that she has what she needs, and she makes sure that others don't drain her resources. I was also thinking that really packed and extremely harmonious fifth house could indicate she could be a very successful advisor in the entertainment industry, in the media industry somehow, or that she could be very good advising other people about their resources or finances. And then I wanted to just say briefly, Stephen, on the health front, I think that...
Steve, are you still with us? Am I still with us?
Cause her fatigue or cause her minor health issues, but she seems to bounce back pretty strongly whenever she does have a minor health issue. And I think that she needs to, generally she's a healthy person, but we've all got weaker parts of the physical body. Right. And I would say it's important that Denise looks after the lungs, the shoulders, the arms and hands, but also that she takes good care of her back, that she makes sure that she maybe does some yoga or some stretching to ensure that her back is doing well. But I know you mentioned relationships, Stephen. I felt that if there's an area in life that can really cause complications for Denise, it's long-term relationships, that she needs to be careful that there's honesty, and that she's being honest with herself in relationships, because she has a tendency to, describe the person that she's with, and you think that this person is wonderful, but then you meet that person and it's not necessarily what you experience. So she almost dresses things up or deludes herself a little bit in long-term relationships. So she has to make sure that is managed, and she needs to make sure that a relationship is healthy and doesn't detract from who she is in the world, or that it it drains her or causes her pain in any way. And I know that sounds a little generic because relationships are often that way. You and I know that from our experiences with all of our clients, but particularly a sensitive area for Denise, I would say.
And yet I think things will turn out well for her in the area of relationship. Using a forecasting method from the Arabs, directing by triplicities, I do this with her 7th house. And Denise was born at night, so the triplicity rulers of her 7th sign, her 7th house in Pisces, these triplicity rulers would be Mars, Venus, and then the moon. So the first third, if we were to take Denise's life and divide it into thirds, the first third is described by Mars in Capricorn. Mars represents strife usually, but here he's in Capricorn. Well, he's exalted. That's pretty decent. The second third of life is shown by Venus in Capricorn and succeeding. Capricorn is, maybe not the best place for Venus, but she's strong. Relationship will happen. It won't be as high a quality as the first third, but the third of life, the way things are going to turn out, we have the moon in Taurus, strong in the 9th house, and this is a very, very rosy picture on the relationship front, relating with other people, and probably with the partner, with partnership as well, romantic partnership. So that definitely looks good as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think that this is, in terms of what's going on with Denise now, I look at her progression, Stephen, and I feel that 2014 is generally a good year for her. I think that there may well be some challenges associated with romance or children if she has children. Nothing catastrophic, but some tensions, some challenges that have to be managed through in those areas. But particularly what I feel is that this is a really expansive time for Denise. This is a time, or this year, particularly now, she is really thinking about what she wants to be. She's thinking very much about her work, her career, her work-life balance, and she's doing that in a very positive, visionary way. In other words, she's creating a new vision. She's ready to define what she wants the future to be about, and she's ready to move forward. I felt that she may have some romance challenges in 2015. That would be peak, I would say, early May of 2015. And I feel that could be a challenging time. And 2016 is a year that she's got to manage really proactively, Stephen. I'd be interested to see what you feel about 2016, because I felt that some challenges come to a head, and again they're likely to be associated with romance, balance in romance. What did you think?
That's very interesting, because looking at her Fear Daria tables, she just entered into the period of Venus. Venus's natural significator for romance and love. So this, I would expect that first thing to bode well for a relationship. And this Venus, her specific Venus, is also oriented toward making relationship happen, because Venus is the exaltation ruler of Pisces. Venus has a lot of say in her 7th house, and Venus is strong here in the 5th. So yeah, relationship issues are going to happen. If she's single, then she'll have a relationship with someone. Now, 7th house could also mean it's your clients as well. So your clients are going to be important to you. If you don't have a private enterprise, you should have one during this period, because your relationship with your public will also be good. She's entering into the Mercury sub-period in 27 March 2015. And Mercury is cadent, so he's in the 6th house, so there might be some minor health issues from 27 March 2015 right on up until late May in 2016. Mercury is in the 6th house of skills, so her skills might be the focus of that year. But yeah, overall, definitely oriented toward either romance or one's public, one's client. She enters into the Mercury period in February of 2022, and that's going to last her for 13 years. And I would expect minor health concerns, because Mercury is in the 6th house, but it will also be a period of purification and refinement of her skills that she uses to earn her money. Now, 2016 specifically, yeah, right around the time that you predicted, I believe it was springtime 2016. In late May of 2016, I see that she's entering into the sub-period of the moon. Still in Venus's overall period, it's going to last 8 years. Just started in February. It's going to last 8 years. But when we get to late May of 2016, she enters into the moon's sub-period. And the moon rules the 11th house, which is friends, organizations, and her dreams. So she's going to have an opportunity to realize some of her personal dreams, either from organizations or from a friend, something of that nature. And the Venus being in the fifth house matters are going to matter for her. They're going to be important through the entire 8 years. And that's either going to be, again, enterprise, a business that she has, or it could be her children. Mars and Venus in the fifth house might possibly speak about 2 children, at least one male, one female. But, Capricorn does have some fertility. Saturn in it might pose some problems with the, having children or not, but Saturn's pretty well behaved in Capricorn.
Yeah, and she's got a harmonious Saturn.
Yeah.
Her fifth house is extremely harmonious. But, I concur with what you've said. I mean, I was interested by that 2016 because I felt that in August of 2016, early August of 2016, she may have some challenges associated with how she feels about herself, probably more likely associated with romantic matters, I would say, but she needs to manage these things well as she progresses through 2016, because I think it's important that we remind people again, Stephen, that the energies are very, very predictable, but the outcomes are to be influenced. So the amount of insight we have about the energies, the preparation that we make to embrace harmony or to tone down any challenges, the choices that we make, the energy that we project, the optimism, etc., that all has an enormous impact.
It does. And perfecting her chart to that year, 2016, I would expect there to be some financial. I would expect earnings to be maybe a source of concern for her, because the perfected second house of finances is the natal 10th house, which is in Gemini, and the ruler of Gemini is Cadence. So I would expect earnings to be not quite as strong this year, perhaps, as they were last year. And if she's on some sort of a fixed salary type of a situation, then I would expect the instability to take the form of unexpected expenses. But so the financial scene of 2016 that you're describing, 2016 starting in May, there might be some challenges there. So 2016 will probably be quite a difficult year. Looking at her 10th house for that year, it's perfected to the natal 6th house. So her career is going in 2016 is going to really depend upon her skills and her professional skills, which are social in their origin, their nature, with the sun in Aquarius, Mercury, the ruler of the 10th house in Aquarius. So social skills are important to how she's going to be earning her money. I have a feeling it's important to how she earns her money anyway now.
Yeah, I do as well, because the primary role of her finances is Venus, and a couple of the challenging progressions that year. Actually, one of them involves Venus. I think that she needs to be sensible with her money. Well, we all do all of the time, I guess, but particularly as she gets into 2015, she needs to make good choices with money. I feel that when it comes to 2016, that would be a bad year to try and launch her own business if she was wanting to create her own enterprise. It'd be far better to do it well before then and plan really well for 2016. Or if she's already in business, then she should really make sure she's got a healthy business pipeline for the remainder of this year and next year, and not just presume that every year is going to be hunky-dory, because it looks like 2016 might be a little challenging, but all things that can be managed.
Yes, they can. And you know what? I think we've come to the final few minutes. I think we got like 8 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that left here. We should probably go ahead and talk about next week's show and set some objectives for that, because we are far from done with the situation in the Crimea. How do you feel about that? Do you have anything you'd like to add about her chart before we transition to that closing?
No, I feel like we've covered a lot there, Stephen. I feel like she's had a 1 hour reading.
Yeah, I would have to say so. So I hope that helped you out, Denise. Thank you very much for sharing your data with us and putting up with the public airing of your dirty laundry there. We hope it was helpful to you. So next week, next Friday, we are going to return to the Crimea and look more closely about the future long-term implications for we Americans. I think this is something that we definitely need to know, don't you, Steve?
I do, and I think it would be really interesting to start looking at the U.S. outlook. We can begin that process, I guess, in the show next week, looking at Putin, looking at the situation in the Ukraine. But I think it would be very interesting to look at Putin's chart, Stephen, because we know that the events and energies of a nation at any point in time are largely described by the energies in the leader's chart. So we need to look at Putin's chart, and I think he will be a fascinating character to explore metaphysically. Maybe we could see what's on the horizon for him as well.
Yeah, I'll pop into the Kremlin and see if they got a copy of that laying around in one of their files. I'll tell them what we're doing and see if they'll give it to us.
It's public information.
I
guess worst scenario is we wouldn't have the time, so we would not necessarily be able to comment on the ascendant and the midheaven, and we wouldn't be able to look specifically at the different domains of life, but we could look at his progressions and see whether there are rosy times or challenging times in the years ahead.
I tell you what, let's do. Let's see. He was born in 1952. Oh wow, he's a cowboy. 9:30 in the morning. The sun would. Okay, well, we don't want to give away the whole ranch right now, but we've got this fascinating person's.
There you go. Sun was rising.
Yeah, we got a source from Astrodienst. You know, they're reliable with birth data. I trust them with birth data very, very much. So we have Vladimir Putin's chart. We'll definitely talk about that and fit it into the big picture here. And we'll look at America. How you feel about checking out America, getting our hands slicked and greasy with the spiritual innards of our great nation?
That would be very, very interesting. I think we'll need to have a number of shows about the US. Maybe one every 6 months or one every 4 months. We could do the outlook. But I think it's particularly important, Stephen, because as we said last week, world events are often very much described by the energies in the leading nation's charts. So no matter what we think of the USA, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, USA is currently the world power. And so we need to understand what's going on in the US chart to understand global dynamics more generally.
Absolutely we do. And we're going to need a thorough familiarity with the natal dynamics of America before we can do anything even remotely close to predicting concrete events that actually happen to America. So we need to understand the actors in this stage here.
Absolutely. And it will be interesting to see how events unfold in the Ukraine over the next few days until our next show, because it certainly was looking extremely intense today, and people were actually killed.
Yeah, I tell you what, I would love to check out how China weighs in on this situation, because my instinct is telling me that this has the flavor of a concession, that if there is some sort of diplomatic tango going on between those two, then this has the feel of a compromise. Okay, China will let you do this and will support you in that, and Russia will, scratch your back in this sort of a way.
Yeah, we'll make some excuses when you misbehave. If you're in, don't veto, you use your veto when we need you to, and we'll use ours when you need us to. Right,
that's a question that I think merits an investigation. So maybe we can have some comments about that next week as well.
That would be really, really good. And then how should we handle readings? Do you want to take some calls next week, or have a couple of people that submit their information so that we look at their charts?
Well, please, by all means, feel free to submit your information. We won't get to it on the air next week. Let's take calls next week, Steve, and get our audience's opinion about what we're saying. And then the week after that, perhaps, or after that, in some near future show, we'll delineate your chart on the air. How's that? Is that a deal for everyone?
That sounds good. And then maybe when you wrap up, if you could remind everybody of our websites, etc.
Oh, absolutely. You can always find Steve at StephenFrampton.com. He publishes a lot of really awesome blogs, articles. He's got a course there that I'm currently taking on how to operate a spiritual enterprise and how to improve spirit connections. A lot of interesting stuff comes out of StephenFrampton.com. And that's Stephen with a V. And while you're at it, you might as well go to Amazon.com and check out his book, too. I mean, I love it, Thinking Completely Outside the Box. It really does summarize a lot of what we're going to do here on Metaphysical Media. Now, you can find me at thegingerpsychic.com. My Facebook page is thegingerpsychic.com. We'd love you to go visit both of our pages. Give it a like. You'll get updates to our material. And you can find the page for this actual show, Metaphysical Media Group, because that's what you guys are. You are the Metaphysical Media Group. We're a community that investigates the paranormal. And we will actually see you guys next week. Thank you very much for joining us. Good night.